to Algeria, Bahrain, and finally Afghanistan from July 2005 to April 2007. Before Afghanistan, Ambassador Neumann, a career member of the Civil Foreign Services, served in Baghdad from February 2004 with Coalition Provisional Authority and then as Embassy Baghdad's liaison with the Multinational Command, where he was deeply involved in coordinating the political party of the military actions. Ambassador Neumann is the author of a memoir for the embassies, 4 Wars, and I have that book. A personal memoir and award, Winning and Losing in Afghanistan, a book on his time in Afghanistan. He has returned to Afghanistan repeatedly and is the author of a number of monographs, articles, and editorials. Actually, he just did an article in the Help, the newspaper, on Afghanistan, and I'm looking forward to his take. So his writing focused most heavily on Afghanistan, stabilization, and Bahrain. So I have the honor to introduce to you Ambassador Ronald as my speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I actually feel a little humbled, given the connections of this center and the depth and all that. You know, your introduction reminded me a little bit of some time ago when the foreign minister of Egypt came to the United States, and there was an Egyptian-American group that did a dinner for him, and they gave him a very fulsome introduction. And it went on for quite a while. And at the end he stood up and he said, you know, in that introduction there was some exaggeration, but not more than is appropriate. So, I thank you. I thank you for the introduction. But as I said, yes, I have a 2-generation connection with Afghanistan, but I can't pretend that it has the depth that you have here. The continuity of the Afghan Center at UNO, that's very special. I first went to Afghanistan. I did not grow up there. I was in university where my father was appointed ambassador there. And so I was, I think, 22. I've just finished with graduate studies, but I had 3.5 months before I had to show up for another employment in the U.S. Army. And being both free and adult enough to travel on our own, I was married then, and unemployed enough to be free to do so, my wife and I went off to Afghanistan. And that was 1967. And so we too have memories because we traveled all over. We went with a American geologist, his Afghan counterpart, who drove from Herat to Kabul. 5 days and 36 passes and 7 river fords, if I remember rightly.
Wow.
Sat on the head of the Buddha, Ramyan, now blown up, camped at the lakes at Bandi Amir, and a marvelous time. I hunted gazelle outside Lashkar and drove south, and we drove from Kabul to Kandahar in a borrowed vehicle. Didn't think anything of it. In fact, I went with a hunting party. Being the ambassador, so it was a good deal. We got invited to good stuff. So I got invited to go with a hunting party way up into the northeast. This little panhandle sticks out in Wakhan corridor. So we went by jeep at the end of the road, and then by horse along the Ahmadzai, the Oxus River, and then by yacht up into the Pamir's camp, about 13,000 foot elevation. So it was marvelous because when I came back as ambassador, the country was at war. I had seen the country at peace. And my father remained involved in Afghanistan because for a long period after the Soviets came in, there was what we call a track 2, a technically informal, non-governmental dialogue between Americans and Soviets about a number of subjects, including Afghanistan. My father was a regular part of that, and he would tell me what he was doing, so I would keep somewhat in touch. And then, of course, I went back to Afghanistan, and then I sometimes joke, because I keep going back since I retired in 2007, that I went back starting in 2010. I was back every year until 2018, and COVID got in the way, and then I was back about 6 weeks before the collapse in authoritative as they get progressively out of date. And so I kept going back. Well, I think, given this involvement in policy, I have to say a few words that are less personal, more about where are we, because where are we is pretty doleful. I would not surprise, I think, anybody in this room to find out that I am bitterly opposed to our decision to leave and to the way in which we conducted it. And we could spend a long time looking backwards, and Congress of the United States is going to spend a long time looking backwards and fighting about it, probably to not great profit, because at this point I'm seeing a few lessons observed and almost none learned, and I don't have much expectation that that's going to be different. We're busy learning bumper stickers that are mostly wrong, and that is passing for knowledge. I'm afraid also, as I look out and see what my colleagues, both former leaders of Afghanistan and many others in the diaspora are doing, that I'm not seeing a lot of realism. A lot of people, including a couple who commented just this last week on an article I wrote, have said, well, it's up to America, you ought to impose, or you ought to make the Doha Agreement fully implemented, because it has in it the notion of a composite government. It's not going to happen. I don't care how good an idea is. If you have no tools and no means of bringing it about, it's not worth thinking about, because it's not going to happen. That's one that isn't going to happen. We had the chance when we had military force. We had it under Trump when they signed the agreement. We had it under Biden when he decided to disregard the conditionality, and we don't have it now, and it isn't going to happen. We are in a process where there is massive agreement in the international community, particularly those who are aid donors, who ought to have some leverage about what ought to happen in Afghanistan, at least in the most minimal fashion, in terms of women's access to education and to work. And that pressure is not producing much. And of course it comes with a tension, because America is, and most of our international partners are devoted to not having people starve in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, since we're not doing developmental assistance, we're not doing military assistance, we're not bombing anybody, about the only tool we have left is our humanitarian assistance. And while people are trying to control it so that it doesn't just go madly to the Taliban, they don't really want to just have people starve in order to make a political point. But that means the flexibility of how you can use that assistance is heavily constrained. I don't want to say there is nothing to be done, because that's not true. I think there are things which America can do, a few, but I do not expect them to produce dramatic change. And then there are other things that Americans in a place like the center can be a part of, should be, I think will be, which I think are equally important. On the policy side, in a sense, we are at a point where we cannot have a strategy. We have a policy. When I've talked to people at the NSC, State Department, we know what we want. We want counterterrorism and humanitarian improvement and the rights of women and a certain amount of stability and inclusive government. The trouble is, a strategy is a roadmap. It is how you get to a goal. It is not a list of actions that go in the general direction of the goal. I can have a goal of going to the moon. I can jump up and down. 50% of my actions are going in the right direction. I'm never going to get a liftoff. So strategy is not a list of actions. It is a designation of actions designed to get you to a goal. It is a map. We don't have the policy tools to have that kind of a strategy right now. So we are in a period, the British would have called it, we're muddling through. We're doing the things we can. I've made some suggestions about limited contacts, but they would have limited benefits and probably overextended time. But we don't have better tools right now. But one should remember that nothing is forever, and that Afghanistan, if it is famous for anything, is famous for surprise. It has repeatedly brought surprise, often very uncomfortable surprises, but it is good for surprises. So there are a few things that are important, I think, as we continue to muddle through. Yes, it's correct to maintain humanitarian assistance, and at the same time it's correct what's happening now with the U.S. pulling back from a lot of stuff because women are not being allowed to participate. It is important to remember that a great deal often happens in Afghanistan without formal recognition, and that in fact, the more you demand formal agreements and policy, the more you often constrain what actually happens on the ground. There are a lot of places where things will happen if you nurture them and if you don't insist that they be recognized. And then sometimes they will be recognized and go backwards. So there's going to be room for a lot of individual small policy achievements that won't fit into a clear policy framework, and that's going to take a lot of management on the ground that is different from just executing some overarching policy. And part of it is to remember that these things, there will be change. I told Ahmadzai he's not going to live forever. He sent his son off to be a suicide bomber. I think he got the generations reversed. But at some point he will go. There are frictions in the Taliban. I don't expect to see them break out into the open very much. They have, one of the sad things about Afghanistan is the Taliban have been far more capable of maintaining unity than all of Afghanistan's political leaders, who also bear a great deal of responsibility for the collapse of the disaster. But things will change, and we know that there are a number of powerful figures who were not in favor of some of the latest policies. We don't know where that goes. Because we don't know, it is important to remain engaged. This is one of the reasons why we have to be careful about legal sanctions beyond legal sanctions that constrain us. So if you have a sanction and you can't engage people, then you need, in our domestic political terms, you need them to make major changes before you can engage them again, because you need a justification that you can hold up to your critics that's sufficient to change the policy. So what you do is you paint yourself into a corner and then you can't get out of it. So it is important, as we put pressures on and sanctions, that we maintain the capability for engagement. And that just has to go on at a low level and in a variety of ways. But we also have to be very careful about things like, if you give something, you have to get something. You have to get away from the idea that we give something now in the hope or the promise that they will do something later. We've done that, and it has not worked. It also teaches bad habits. And this is not a problem only of the Biden administration. We have 3 administrations that have, in a row, have paid off for one kind of hostage-taking or another. Obama releasing people from Guantanamo for an American deserter. The Trump administration, not just the Doha agreement where the Taliban gave almost nothing and we a great deal, but also, to get back to kidnapped university professors from the American University of Afghanistan, quite innocent people, but we released, or we forced President Ghani to release several Haqqani leaders from prison. And then we just did it again for this guy Friedrichs, releasing a major drug trafficker, Haji Bashir Nurzai, from prison in order to get a quite innocent American release, but we released a major drug, not just a major drug killer, this was a guy that we captured in a deliberate operation to lure him out of the country, and one of DEA's big successes. So we've kind of taught people if you stand fast, the Americans usually move. It's not a very helpful lesson to teach, though, if you want to convince them that they should do something. So we have to be a little more careful. So I think right now, as our government muddles through, there are other things that need doing, and you're doing some of them. One is the huge need for education of Afghans, and particularly Afghan women, remains. And a big piece of that, of course, is in the diaspora and in the refugee camps, where a lot of people are going to be for a long time. And we need to educate those people. We need education for Afghans who remain in Afghanistan. Because, aside from the human value of education, one of the things you're doing is keeping flames alive for a future, even though you cannot see the future. To use a different